Hello and welcome to the D293 Section 4 recording video here to help you review this section on recommending assessment modifications. I am Dr. Dan Baron-Cotton, happy to be back here with you for this fourth and final video of D293. Remember, these videos aren't meant to replace the course of study, so please do be sure to continue to lean into the course of study and all of the resources that are there and available to you for a much more comprehensive understanding of these topics. But as we get into this video and we talk about recommending assessment modifications, what we're after is equity here for our students and our learners. We want to make sure that all of our students and all of our learners have a fair and equitable opportunity to demonstrate their learning, their knowledge, and their skills and abilities as it relates to the learning goals, objectives, and content within our courses, classes, or trainings. It's important that everybody has the opportunity to be successful here, and the assessments that we create are not hindering or disadvantaging particular groups or advantaging other groups. So again, we want to strive for equity here and making sure everybody has that chance to be successful and show what they know as it relates to the content. And it's important that we mitigate bias in assessments for those reasons that I just mentioned. We want to ensure that accurate measurement of student knowledge. So what do the students, what do the learners truly know about the content and the material that's been covered? And we want to make sure that assessments can reveal that to us and that they're doing so accurately and efficiently. We're also going to be promoting equity and inclusiveness whenever we're doing this because we're making sure that everybody is welcome and able to perform to the best of their abilities and that everybody has that equal opportunity to demonstrate their knowledge, their skills, and their abilities, and they're not being hindered by something that's not content related or specific to them. And we also, if we're giving these good assessments and we're mitigating biases and we're putting things together the way we should, we're going to get really valuable data that can help us make good data-informed decisions about our instructional design practices, about our teaching and our training practices, and will help us to continue to iterate and improve, which is such a key pillar of instructional design. There's several barriers to fairness in assessment that we want to think about and talk about and be aware of. And with each of these, I encourage you to lean into the root word for each bias. Within these, we're always after a valid sort of assessment, and when we don't have that valid, we end up with these particular biases. The first here is construct validity bias, and here we want to think construction. We want to think how we're building, how we're putting together a particular assessment. If we have inaccuracies that develop in the way an assessment is measuring knowledge, skills, and our abilities, and it's not lining up with what we're intending it to do, that's construct validity bias. We want to make sure whatever assessment we're using is an accurate indicator of the intended skill, knowledge, and ability. So if we have a learning objective that's asking students to create a highly usable and efficient resume, we might be looking for an assessment to test that learning objective that's observable. We might choose a multiple choice test on resumes where students are going to ask multiple choice questions about what makes a good resume. Or might we be better off to have students actually create a resume? Because then if they're actually creating the resume, we can see if they're able to, in fact, create a highly usable resume. If we give a multiple choice test here, we might be advantaging students that are good at multiple choice tests or disadvantaging students that are have test anxiety or issues with multiple choice tests. And at the end of the day, what we're trying to determine is, can a student create that resume? And we also have content validity bias. And with content validity bias, we're going to be focused in here on the content. So all of our assessments should be an accurate measure of the content that was instructed. And that's about, what we're teaching, the material that we cover in the instruction should be represented on the assessment. Everything that we intend to be on that assessment should be there. There should be no surprises to students on an assessment because there's information that wasn't covered. And the way that we teach it, the way that we explain it, the way that it's learned should be what's also on that assessment and in that same representation here. We want to accurately reflect what was taught. So if we're in a U.S. history class and we're working through a unit or a topic there, we want to make sure that the information that's on that unit test or on that unit assessment is about U.S. history and about the particular topic or time in U.S. history that we just covered. We don't want any surprise questions on world history because we didn't cover that content. And we also want to make sure that the assessment is equal in the distribution of, if we spend 50% of the unit on one particular topic, then that assessment should account for about 50% of that same material. There should, again, be no surprises. If we put strong credence on it during the content and during the instruction, that should also be matched within the assessment. And then we have item selection bias, and this is going to be about a specific item on an assessment, and that one specific item is either advantaging or disadvantaging a particular group. And it doesn't matter what that group is, it can be anything from race, gender, socioeconomic status, religion, all the way into the example that I always like to use is if I was a math teacher and I was writing statistics questions for my class, I know I would probably want to write a lot of statistics questions about football because I'm a big football fan and that comes natural to me. But in doing so, I would be using football jargon that might not be familiar to other folks who are not fans of sports. And at the end of the day, though, football jargon has nothing to do with statistics and math. And that's what we need to make sure that we're assessing is the information as it relates to the content. So these questions need to be free of jargon about football. So an item selection bias might be, say, question number 7 was about football. That's going to advantage the football fans and disadvantage fans, or disadvantage those that are not fans of football. But that doesn't have anything to do with the goals and objectives. So I've got to make sure I'm creating better scenarios for those questions. And then we have predictive validity bias, and this is all about trying to make a prediction into the future. When we give an assessment, we want to make sure that that assessment is an accurate indicator of future behavior. Is this going to be a good forecast of what we can likely expect moving forward? If a learner performs well on this particular assessment, we want that to mean that they're going to perform well as they move forward into the next phase or into the real world or wherever it might be. An example that's good to use here is the road test when you get your driver's license. If we want to determine if a driver is going to be a good driver, there's no better way than to actually get them in the car and have them drive. Because odds are, if you can drive well today, you'll be able to drive well tomorrow and next year. If we were to give only a multiple choice test and that would be the only indicator of whether or not you could earn your driver's license, that would be predictive validity bias because when we're driving, we're not taking multiple choice tests. So there's not that good indicator of your driving skills and ability based on how you perform on a multiple choice test. We always want to make sure we're also removing and knocking down barriers to accessibility in our assessments. And some of those issues can come up when we have irrelevant knowledge. And this is along those same lines of what I was just mentioning about those football statistics questions. If this is information that's not related to the content, to the learning goals, and to the objectives, but it's getting put into our assessments and causing confusion or issues with our learners, that's a problem. And we're creating a barrier to this assessment and to the equal opportunity for folks to be successful. So make sure the information that's in the assessment, the language that you're using is relevant and fits within the larger picture of what you're trying to accomplish. And then we also want to make sure that we're aware of cognitive load. We don't need to try to overwhelm somebody's memory or ability to handle information or work through reading levels. Again, here, if we're after questions in a math test and we want to know if somebody has that skill or ability, we want to avoid very wordy and higher than grade level reading levels for our word problems because we might see some folks that struggle through reading those word problems and are not able to apply the math skills that they have. They might be some of our best math students, but might struggle with some of that reading comprehension. And now they're struggling on a math assessment, not because of their math skills, but because of the reading skills. So let's make sure that we're keeping things at an appropriate level for all of our learners to be successful. We always want to lean into the universal design for learning within our assessments and some really important tips to keep into consideration for assessments that we want to make sure that we're using are that our assessments are always aligned to the learning goals. Alignment is such an important piece of instructional design. If you think backwards design, we begin with the learning goals, then we set our assessments, then we set our learning resources and activities. Everything aligns to those learning goals, so we're testing and assessing exactly what we intend to. We always want to offer authentic opportunities for assessments. So again, if we're thinking about a resume and we want to find out if our students are learning how to write a resume, it's an authentic opportunity to assess them by having them actually write that resume rather than giving the multiple choice test. We want to ensure that engagement is something that's also being assessed in addition just to content knowledge. We always want to include frequent formative assessments. We talked a lot about formative assessments in section 1. Throughout the process, when we're giving these formative assessments, there should be no surprises when we get to a summative assessment because our learners will know what to expect and we should know how our students and learners are performing and try to increase their abilities and their knowledge and skills as it relates to that. We always want to pull down and remove those unnecessary barriers that we just talked about. Whenever possible, we can use multiplicity to support variability through flexible assessments. So maybe we can have students write an essay, record a podcast, or create a project. As long as they're demonstrating that they have a grasp of the content as it relates to the goals and objectives, that's ultimately what we're after here. We always want to use rubrics to clarify our expectations. This is something we touched on in section 3 as well, but we want to make sure that students know what we expect of them. They know what good work looks like and what they need to do for their assessments so there are no surprises. And rubrics also allow students to sort of self-assess before submitting their work. And then as designers, as teachers, as instructors, we want to always reflect on the summative assessments for our future iterations and designs. If we're noticing that a lot of students are really struggling with a particular assessment or a particular question on an assessment, that often means that's a good opportunity for us to improve our coursework, our learning resources, or that assessment. Let's not blame our learners for not doing well. Let's find better ways to teach them and assess them on that material. We always want to make sure we're taking into account the 4 main principles of accessibility as well. And we can remember those by using the POUR acronym. The first one being P for perceivable. And this is all about how we perceive the assessment. And this is about using our senses, our eyesight, our vision, our hearing. Are we able to interact with and perceive the components of an assessment here? And all students, again, have that equitable opportunity to do so. So if we have a visually or hearing impaired student, do we have a way in which they can interact with this? If we want to indicate stop and go on an assessment on a screen, we don't want to use just a red and green screen because a student that's colorblind will not be able to tell the difference between that red and green. So we might want to use a red stop sign that says stop and it vocalizes stop, and then a green arrow that says go and says go. So that way we're addressing multiple senses and it can work for everybody. O is for operable, and are we able to operate the interface and operate the assessment here? Is everybody going to be able to use this? If we're asking students to drag and drop something with a mouse, well, what if a student's not able to use a mouse on a computer? Is there an alternative way in which they can use it? Can they use the keyboard? Is there text to speech? Things like that that we might be able to use. When we're asking our learners to use technology, we need to make sure that they're able to interact with and use technology equitably. So again, they're not missing points or questions or assessments based on something other than the content related knowledge. U is for understandable, and this is all about keeping the information understandable on the interface. We're keeping things clear, navigable, so folks know where to go and what they're clicking on and what they're using, and that things are at an appropriate level. Think back again to that irrelevant knowledge and cognitive load. That's also a factor here in understandable, but we should be able to move through something and understand what's being asked of us on an assessment. And finally, R is for robust. And robust is all about making sure that we have a multitude of ways to interact with any type of technology that we're using. Everybody should be able to have access to the technology that's required for an assessment. So if we're requiring students to download and use a mobile app for a homework assignment or for an activity, we need to make sure everybody is able to use that app, has access to a device that can download it in the internet, and also that that app is going to work across multiple platforms. So maybe some students might have an Android or an iPhone, and will the app work on both of those? Or others might want to use a computer or a tablet. We want to make sure what we're using in our classes can be accessed through all those different platforms. Be sure to continue to lean into the resources and course tips. Set up a call with your instructor if you have any questions, and good luck on that OA.